cream ale today, Josh. So do you realize, and we were just talking about this earlier, that when I was a bartender in the 80s, this was the most, we sold more cream ales than any other, and this was before light beers, of course, but cream ale was the thing we'd sell tons of. And what did you say, actually, that it was at one time?
Certain time, 70s and throughout the 80s, was the highest selling beer in the Rust Belt. So,
I never even heard of that one before.
Jenny Cream Ale from Genesee, New York.
Yeah.
So welcome, Bart Torre. We are here in downtown Timber Hills, Josh Airing Studios once again for yet another very important podcast. So, over the years, all of us have ridden by Bart on the rail trail, dude, because let's just say over the last, since 2017, you haven't been really racing, but what are your average miles per week?
Per week, they're usually around 450.
Nice. And that's about 24,000 a year?
I've been doing about 23 to 24,500 a year. Yeah.
That's so freaking awesome. And so all of us have seen him on the rail trail at one point or another. And a lot of that's on a mountain bike. It's not like that's pure road miles, right?
And actually, most of it now has been on either the gravel bike or the mountain bike. I do a lot of just road riding on the mountain bike, actually.
Dude, that's so awesome. So I think I first began to know of Bart when he was basically a little kid, and I didn't even know him really, but I used to race a lot of road bike with his dad, right? And that would have been the early 90s, the mid 90s. And back then we had a training race that was the best ever. I look forward to that more than any racing on the weekends. And it was down where the Laser Dome is now in Salunga, I guess you call it, outside of Mount Joy there. And we had a 3.1 mile loop. And we had, in those days, it was Tuesday Night Worlds. And everybody who was anybody would show up. And we'd usually race, 6, 8, 10 laps by the end of the season. And it was just awesome. There wasn't much traffic then there. And then eventually it went to Wednesday Night Worlds because they figured you need the gap from racing on Sunday to racing on Saturday. Anyway, that's where I started racing with your dad. And then I'd see him at races and stuff. Lancaster had has a really strong cycling community. Just not only for like touring, but for racing guys. A lot of them come out of there through various programs. So anyway, you were like, what, 10, 12?
I was 16.
So you were just getting into it, but you were well into it. And talking about this Lancaster cycling culture, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the Red Rose Rockets. And that's kind of where you and I start talking about stuff that we wanted to talk about on the podcast. Red Rose Rockets is one. And I even remember helping them sponsor, and I remember so many good cyclists that came out of there. What's your experience been with the Red Rose Rockets, and when did you start getting involved with them?
So I started about October of 98 with the Rockets, and it was great because we all lived within 10 to 12 mile radius of each other. So it was either Hempfield High School, Manheim Township High School, or Travis was in Conestoga Valley. So we were all able to meet up after school for rides, and we always rode on Saturdays and Sundays together.
Wow.
And Brad Vieira, I've rode with him for 10 years straight. That even into like the Espoir and senior leagues.
Yeah.
And it was such a positive environment, different than other junior teams that we would race against, because we had really good backing. Bruce Williams, who actually passed away a few years ago, he was he was huge in making sure that we stuck with cycling and we were passionate about it, and he did everything possible to give us the best resources that we had. We had Spy sunglasses, we had Rudy Project, we had Garnet shoes. It was just, and then we had Brian Burke, who was the coach at the time, and he came from an exercise physiology background from actually East Stroudsburg is where he did his master's degree. And so he was really instrumental in getting us into the weight room, getting really structured training for us, detailing that into our race program that we had as a junior. And then we eventually brought Steve Lasson into the team as well. And then he had a whole wealth of knowledge because he worked with Mercury, he worked with I think 7-Up, a whole bunch of different pro teams at the time.
Right. Now I remember all this. Yeah. So such a good program. Great kits, those green and red, and just great kits.
Until we changed the one year to the like pink.
Yeah, that's right.
Color.
Everybody was like skeptical and stuff.
Yeah, we kind of boycotted those jerseys and just went back to the previous years.
Are the Red Rose Rockets still active now? Not so much, right?
I don't think so.
Man,
No.
that's a shame. That's a shame. Damn it. I hate to hear stuff like that. But yeah, so anyway, so you came up through this great developmental program in a great place to ride, Lancaster County. And your dad's, there's a lot, we had a ton of races up until COVID, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I could pick a race within 100 miles, a road race, a darn good road race or a crit or a time trial every weekend, right?
Yep.
That bar schedule was huge. 6, sometimes 2 or 3 races in a weekend you could pick from. Boy, those days have gone fast.
Well, that's long gone.
Long gone. Man, that was so much fun. Because it really did. If you go to Tuesday Night Worlds, then Wednesday Night Worlds, and you went there and you got up to speed with the gang and, focused on racing at high speeds, bumper to bumper, then that really set you up to do well on Saturday. When you got into a crit or a road race, it was like just another day at the office. And, it made it all really fun. And it also, made you feel competent to get into a race. Because I knew after Wednesday Night Worlds or Tuesday Night Worlds in the 90s, that I could jump in with anybody and race in a crit and at least not be a pain in somebody's ass, not be a danger or a threat. I knew how to ride in a crit because of Thursday night or Tuesday night.
Well, they had a Thursday race too.
And then there was the Thursday Night Worlds too, which was more of a road race.
That was like a 5-mile circuit, I think.
Yeah. Good stuff. So, all right. So then you start locally with Red Rose Rockets. You got into the structured program. You had some real good mentors. And then you started to get into some races, right? They had what, U19 and stuff like that? Or
yeah, so because I started when I was 16, so 16 to 18 was the juniors. And for juniors at the time, there was tons of racing because you had the Lance Armstrong Junior Series at the time, and that was huge. And you had like the whole point system for that, and depending on how you placed in that point system, it set you up for like regional or national camps. I think Brad actually went to one of those before, and then after that, then I went to the U23, and U23 versus juniors like night and day different.
Yeah, that was the real deal.
Well, the distances of the races for nationals, you go from, 17, 18 junior nationals was like, I don't know, 50 miles or something. And then you go and you do U23 nationals and it was 200K.
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
120 miles.
Yeah.
Wow. So, okay. So you're progressing right along. You're doing good. So did you have some successes at national events during that period?
I did. It was actually one of the better moments of my life and also one of the worst experiences of my life.
So true. Let me tell you something. That's the yin and yang of getting older. It's like when I look back on stuff, it's like, man, that was like the best experience, but it's also the worst. And that's just, the Orientals had it right, yin and yang. But anyway.
Well, because it was my last year as a junior, and I was in the time trial, and that was in Texas, in College Station, Texas. So it was an out and back time trial. And that's when I had the Cervelo P3 back in the day. And I was able to time trial really well back then. So I lent the wheel to somebody that happened to be racing U23, and they forgot to change the cassette back to junior gearing.
Oh,
so
no.
I thought it was blocked off for the junior range because I had a 45 in the front, so I could use a 12 in the back. But then that person was using an 11 in the back. I didn't know it. So I didn't think about double checking. So I put the wheel on. I did my time trial, and I was actually 4th.
Oh.
But the thing is that I couldn't even get into the 11. So the whole time I was racing in my 12, but I was so mad because I was like, I thought in my head I couldn't get into my 12, and I was, mentally I was thinking, oh man, I can't get into my 12. I need to go into my 12 so I can go faster.
Yeah.
When really I was in my 12 and I was going super good. Ended fourth. I was 6 seconds from podium, and then I went to the rollout because that's when you had to roll out for juniors, and it wouldn't go into the 11, and so they actually manually put it into the 11. And I said to the guy, "Yeah, I know." I was so mad because it wouldn't go into that gear. I said, "That's my 12," and I wanted my 12. And he said, "No, that's an 11 actually," because he rolled it out, and I missed rollout. And he's like, "This doesn't make rollout." And I was like, "What do you mean? That's the 12. I have 45-12. That should be good." He's like, "No." He's looked, and it's an 11. And I was like, "Oh man."
So before it didn't count.
That didn't count. It was by far
How
the
about
best
the
I
mental
felt.
effect, though, in your mind? You think about that because time trialing, if anything, is so mental. And then you're the whole time thinking, I can't get into my 12. And you were in your 12.
Because I was feeling super good that year too. And it's things like that they're bad in the moment, but
boy, they pay off later in life.
They actually pay off because that one moment could have changed my trajectory a little bit in the future. But then at that age, it's good. It's a good learning experience. You learn to double check your stuff, which.
So, good story, great stuff, and I've done that so many stupid times you wouldn't believe. I just went to a race the other week and I forgot my freaking shoes, and I was like, dude. The moral of the story is I should have put extra shoes in the van, always an extra helmet and extra shoes. And I had come to that conclusion after I screwed up maybe 15 years ago once like that. And I forgot to put the extras in there. I'd cleaned the van out or something and I didn't. Anyway. So, yeah, sometimes you make the same mistakes over again. So, okay. So then how did you want to go to Europe, right? To make it with the big time. So how did that pan out? I mean, did you have to get a pro contract or did you just go over there and freelance it?
Well, it took me a couple years because then once you're U23, there's a whole big learning curve because the races are different. So 2003 was my first year as U23. So I raced with an elite team out of Baltimore, lateral stress velo at the time. It's now Kelly Benefits.
Right. That's a great program.
They got me because when I ended my junior racing, I was still a 3 because I never upgraded. But then in 2003, I upgraded straight to a 1 pretty much within a few months.
Well, you had to have some results to do that.
Well, I won one of the stage races. That's when they used to have all the stage races too back then.
Yeah.
So I went and I think I won one stage race and then I won a couple other races. And then I eventually got enough on my resume that I was able to contact the team over in Belgium. At the time, it was the Cycle Center. BioRacer is the team that it was called, run by Bernard Moorman. And it was kind of like an affiliate team with the U.S. national team at the time because they worked hand in hand. We swapped riders out for different races. So then I went over there and I did that in 2004 and 2005.
And so what were your challenges like there?
Well, the races were way more aggressive than anything you ever do in the U.S. You're racing on roads that are about the width of a sidewalk with 100, 120 guys, and everybody always wants to be at the front. So you're getting elbowed into the ribs. You're getting like practically pushed into the ditch, and it's just a different style. It's really aggressive. The Belgians are super aggressive and just really fast, and I noticed the distinction right away.
Wow! So no surprise on this last Sunday on the Paris-Roubaix. So we're talking about elbows and racing on narrow and all the cobbles and stuff. And the Belgians were all dominant and shit. Yeah.
Cobbles I didn't do so well on. There were some races that we did that had cobbles. Because I actually remember reconning the one race that had 6 sections of cobble per lap. And I was getting destroyed just reconning it. I was like, how am I going to possibly do this? And then in the race, I actually made the front split. And I surprised like myself and our team director. But then I was like, dude, I don't want to be up here.
I can't keep it.
Because the rest of our team was all back into the field, but luckily our team leader was there, so I was able to help him out because that wasn't a race that I was even supposed to really finish.
So it took away your guilt pangs. You're like, okay, well, if I help him, then I have a right to be here.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the race on the cobbles is scary though, because you got the little sections on each side. They're about this wide, and they're just cement instead of the cobbles, and that's what you race on. So you're actually echeloning on that little section of cement.
Yeah.
At like 30, 32 miles an hour. And so you always have to think that if the guy in front of crashes, you're going down.
And then today they're on Paris-Roubaix on Sunday. They were slipping off of that into the mud. And then in other sections, they put these big yellow cone barriers. So you're not even allowed to ride that little section of cement or macadam or whatever. Or sometimes it's like a towpath. You had to stay up on the cobbles.
They tend to do that now, but I mean, even back in the races I was doing, guys were cutting through people's yards. The one guy was like almost at the person's front door of their house, cutting through their front yard, so you could not have to go over the cobbles. I was like,
How many miles were you putting on in those days when you were in Europe training?
Well, that's when you have to balance out training versus racing.
Yeah.
Because all the hard training is done in the off season. That's what people that are not in the sport of cycling, they don't really understand that. You actually put more miles in November through February than you do during the season. Because during the season, starting in March through July, you can race 3-4 times a week.
Yeah. Wow.
And if you're doing stage races, you have to be able to recover before the next one. So the rides were,
So when you were training, you were doing what, 600-700 a week?
Over in the off season, I was doing big miles like that. But during the season, it's all about staying sharp, staying like race sharp and getting the speed.
Yeah.
More than the intensity. All the intensity and the big miles are all in December, January, February. That's when I was doing all my 5 to 8 hour rides.
Yeah. Wow. Good stuff. And so you were in Europe how many years?
Just 2. I would have liked to keep going, but after 2, I realized that it was time to pull back and leave.
So do you think that was during a period of heavy doping?
That was by far the hardest time to try to make it, because there wasn't as many teams as there are now, and the doping was a lot worse. I mean, right now it's a lot better than it was.
Yeah, I would imagine.
So, I mean, when you're there, and because my physiological testing that we did with our team doctor, I mean, it was by far the best on the team, and my watts per kilogram were the highest that I've ever put out.
What was that?
I was at 6.8 watts per kilogram at threshold.
Holy crap.
At 136
Dude,
pounds.
Phenomenal. That's phenomenal.
So my physiological stuff was 100% there.
6.8 is like...
I was doing 415 watts at threshold. And that was when I was testing in March.
Wow. Say that again?
When we did the physiological testing in March, because we wanted to do the first one as soon as we flew over there. And then with jet lag and everything, I always tried to do it within the first week of getting there. So that way I had the best shot at getting good results on the testing. And I was always 135 to 136 pounds when I was racing. And I was doing 412 to 415 at threshold.
Which is about, if you listen to Chris Horner, he says that's basically you got to hold between 400 and 500 for like 30, 40 minutes because that's what climbs are.
Yeah.
And you could do that.
Yeah, when I do hill repeats, I was doing usually about 410.
I mean, even Pogacar isn't 6.8. In fact, that's one of the things they say about him. And they have this new parameter now when they look at VAM, which is the amount of meters per climbing relative to your volume of climbing. And that's a little different. And they don't match up always. So like you could have a high 6.8, but a low VAM. And then you go, well, what's with that? Or vice versa. Anyway.
Yeah, that's why you have to look at all this stuff in relative terms. Like a bigger guy, like in absolute terms, is good on the flats. But but when you take everything into like relative terms and body weight into account, that's when climbing the watts change and the relative terms really come into play.
Yeah, got it. Very good. So, so you're there 2 years or roughly. Did you have any race successes there, or were you just as a worker bee in most part?
I mean, I had successes. I mean, they were definitely hard, and by success I mean like top 15. But to me, at that point, that was a success because I never had to work so hard to get a top 15 in a race
in your life.
Because I mean, I remember the one race specifically that I was in the field and I was it was just starting to break up, and the one guy on my team, he was a huge guy. He was like 6'2", 180 pounds. He gave me a really, really good hand sling, and I was able to catch the guys because he was leaving the gap. And then I just had to do everything I could to stay with them. And I mean, that was the hardest I ever worked to get a top 15 in my life. I mean, I couldn't even sprint at the end. I was so dead.
So you were 15th in the peloton.
I was like, man, this is insane.
Good stuff, man. That's great to hear. How did you like, your accommodations and your food and stuff over there? Was that pleasurable?
Well, living in Europe from the U.S. is completely different. So, I mean, that's all the little things you have to get used to: the food, the culture, the language. Because when I first went over there, I didn't know any Dutch. So I landed at the airport. All I knew is I had to get onto a train to go to some random town for somebody to pick me up.
Yeah.
But then the next year when I went back over, I was able to speak in Dutch. So I was able to communicate better with people, actually get my own food at the grocery store, at the butcher, stuff like that. But a lot of guys can't adapt to that. So that's why a lot of guys crack mentally because of that aspect, not just because of the racing, but because
plus you're all alone, and plus it's your first time away from home, and
well, the good thing is
a lot of shit going on there.
Our environment there was actually really good because we all lived in the same house. It was like an old bed and breakfast that they bought and they made into like a cycle center. So the team director and his wife lived there as well. The team doctor, who worked with the U.S. Postal Service at the time, he lived about 10 kilometers away. So he was able to come over. The one other guy that always helped out with the team, he was really close by. So it was actually a really good atmosphere to start out in until the sponsors really kicked in and put a lot of pressure on the team. Then the atmosphere changed a lot.
Got it. So, yeah, that's a similar story that Ryan DeWald tells when he went over with John DeLong, and they spent all that time there. Same kind of a thing. It was so freaking hard. But, yeah, it was cool because they were in a farmhouse with a guy who knew cycling, and forget that dude's name. Anyway, so then you come back. So then what?
Well, then, because I figured that I didn't want to have to dope, so I would just cut my losses and come back to the U.S. and race here and try to make it here until I realized that it was actually getting more prevalent over here as well. And then at that time, it was really political, trying to make it onto even a Division III team at the time, because one, there wasn't as many as there are now, and the politics were just so rampant in cycling at the time that if you didn't know the right people, even if you had a fairly good resume, you weren't going to really go anywhere. And I just remember all the time, because Floyd Landis is from this area, and I always wanted to be the next Floyd, and he was always a big inspiration for me.
Yeah, and for sure.
I wanted to make everybody, proud, but then I realized that it wasn't all that much better over in the U.S.
as it was in Europe.
So
the same obstacles presented themselves again.
Yeah, I mean, I gave it another couple years, but then it came to the point where I had to figure out, all right, do I want to keep going or do I want to just call it quits and start school? Because at that point, I went 5-6 years between high school and no college education. So I always told myself that if I don't have a contract by the time I'm 23, I'm going to just hang up the racing and go to school. So that's what I decided to do. I was waiting on a response from what's now Kelly Benefits team, because they were just starting up back then.
Yeah.
And I didn't hear anything in time, so I put my transcripts in for school, got accepted to a university, and then like literally the next week later, they emailed me and they asked me if I was still interested. And I was like, too late, man.
No shit. So you said no.
Yeah.
So did you say I can race for you on an amateur level?
No, I was like, I'm just going to put racing to the side. I'll just ride for fun, because at that point, I made a commitment to myself many, many years before, and to my parents, that I would give it as much time as I needed. But then when I hit 23, I didn't have a contract, I was going to go to school.
Yeah.
So then I went straight through undergrad and graduate school, because I wanted to set a good example for my sister, because other than my father, nobody else in our family even has college education. So I wanted to be a good example for her, show her. I took 5-6 years off, but I'm still going to go to undergrad and then grad school, and so that way.
Yeah, that's a hell of an example. I know when I got out of Penn State, and I was thinking I was going to work for a while, for financial cash flow reasons. And then I thought I wanted to go back to school and get a graduate degree. That's really hard. Once I was out, I was like out. So I appreciate what you've done and what you just said.
It's definitely not
easy. And hopefully
easy.
your sister appreciates it as well.
Well, she did her graduate work, so I think I was a pretty good example for
Far
her.
out. So, so then you see you on the railroad bed, and you're still doing some killer 400 or 500 mile weeks. Some days, right? You work at Hershey Med now, right?
Yeah.
So some days, I think we had this discussion. So you leave Lancaster, and then you ride to work, and then you ride down the railroad trail bed all the way over to like
I
almost
usually go
Ephrata.
out to the end of the trail where it ends in Lebanon City, and turn around and head back.
And then down to Lancaster, and that's what, 100 miles?
I was normally doing, I would drive to work and then get my bike and then leave from Hershey out the rail trail back, go to work, get my car, and then drive home. So it was long days. But I did that even when I was in Virginia. I was driving to work and then riding until sometimes 9 o'clock at night, and then go back, get my car, and then drive home. I did that for the past 6 years.
So what you were telling me just now on this break, that you usually like to put a portion of the show on live Instagram.
Yeah.
But that wasn't possible today because of why?
Facebook, Instagram, and Telegram are down. Employees were not allowed in the building for Facebook headquarters, where everything controls, like everything's run from. And Mark Zuckerberg's stock, he lost $70 billion today. Can you imagine losing $70 billion? None of us will ever individually see that kind of money. It's crazy. Oh, shoot.
And it was probably what fallout
the next day.
Fallout from the 60 Minutes whistleblower thing. Here's the thing. And I always say this to people, and everyone just looks at me funny, like it's Bill being a contrarian again. But all governments, all organizations, because we were just, where I'm going with this, because we were talking about UCI, all those governments and all those organizations, I'm going to refer to a guy by the name of Machiavelli, another great Italian. And he said, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
So the thing you got to always remember is no matter what the organization is, it could be the Catholic Church, there are going to be pockets of bad shit going on and corruption. That doesn't mean that you throw the baby out. You say, we got to get rid of government. Got to start a new government.
Yeah,
we got to get rid of the UCI. Facebook's got to come down. It's like, no. All these organizations. And we're also talking about all the whole thing with the FDA and with Moderna and all the big companies and all the pressure that you see at work. So they all do that. So it's not like we get rid of that and then everything will be fine. We clean out Washington and everything will be fine. It's like, no, it won't. It'll be the same thing. So the idea is you just got to deal with this shit and not get carried away. It's like, okay, this is a problem with Facebook. That doesn't mean you got to shoot Zuckerberg and destroy
I
Facebook.
don't know what it is. I feel like it's when hackers get involved with things, they can
Yeah.
have anything they
Anyway,
want.
so my point is that we were just talking about Bart did some mountain bike racing and kind of enjoyed that because it wasn't that political involvement. There wasn't, it was more of a grassroots field. That we've all felt this. And so, and then the next thing that comes out of the mouth is that, well, I'm kind of getting that feel with gravel racing. And Bart shakes his head, yes. And then he goes, as long as the UCI doesn't get involved. So there again, you want a governing body because it does put these races on and they do sort of a good job, but there are also going to be parts of them that are corrupt. And that doesn't mean we get rid of the UCI. It just means that figure out a way to adapt. One way would be to form a stronger, and this, not always do I agree with Lance Armstrong, but form a stronger riders union, just like the NFL has, because at least then you can push back and say, wait a minute, guys. Okay, this is a little bit crazy.
But I think gravel racing does really well now, just as it is.
Yeah.
So if the UCI comes in, it's going to be very, very centralized. But the way it is now, it's decentralized. I mean, the promoters now, they seem to do very well with the number of entrants that they get.
Totally.
So I don't think the UCI coming in is going to make it any better.
So then you always search out the money trail and you can find out why the UCI would want to get involved.
That's probably going to increase the fees, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because then they're going to have they're going to probably increase the registration fee, which is already a little bit higher for gravel racing versus road racing.
Should be less because it's easier to put on, but that's another subject. So anyway, you did a little mountain bike racing, but then you haven't ridden since 2017 in a race.
No. The last race I did was Mountain Bike Marathon Nationals in Arkansas.
Holy crap.
Yeah. Somebody told me that it would be a good idea that I do that because I didn't know much about the course, but I did other ones. I did Stokesville and Shenandoah 100, I think, and a couple other endurance type mountain bike races. So I went all the way to Arkansas just to figure out, no, this is a little bit too technical for me. And my hand was all messed up at the time, so I had to drop out one lap into the race.
So how many times have you gotten either hit by a car or hit by a deer?
I got hit by 5 cars now. One deer, which a deer hurts a lot more than a car. I would rather get hit by a car than a deer. But no, this.
Yeah,
shoulder,
what's this deal now? How's this going?
It's good. I'm 5 weeks out now from surgery number 3 on the left side. So,
as a result from a car?
Numerous things. I initially broke this back in 2013 in Virginia on the bike trail, and that broke the collarbone and also tore all the ligaments in my shoulder, so that was repaired. And then I crashed again in 2017, and because that's when I hit a cat. Over in Reims, I hit a cat that jumped out of the ravine, and it twisted my front wheel, shot me into the ditch, broke it for the second time. It was repaired. And then I got hit by a car in 2020, in September 2020, and fractured it again. And it was already plated. So we decided to let it go and let it heal on its own, but it didn't heal. So then now they had to go back in and revise it. And then also in 2020, in June, I fractured my right side for the second time. Because I originally fractured this side in 2006 for the first time. And then 2020 in June in York, I was trying to take a new road that I didn't take before. And it was really shady. And, you were going in and out of the shade. And then all of a sudden I hit railroad tracks that were at the worst angle you could possibly hit them. My wheel just went right in. Yeah, and my sister had to drive like 30 miles to get me because I knew as soon as I got up that it was fractured. It was not. 2020 was a pretty bad year for me.
It sounds it. Holy shit. So now what's the future like? You going to get back on the bike as soon as you can? I hope. life won't be the same without it.
I mean, it's definitely good to take a little break from cycling because I've been riding so many miles for so many years for nothing really because that it became tedious. So now I haven't ridden for 5 weeks, and that's never happened in my life. If I have took more than a week off, that was very rare.
Yeah.
So this is the longest I ever took off. But what I want to do that my family members are not very happy about is I want to kind of transfer into motorcycle racing.
Oh boy.
So I got a Ducati that I want to start taking onto the track next year once I am 100% good to go with the shoulder. And I'm thinking about not riding as much and doing more track time on the motorcycle.
I wish you the best, but I always like to see you on the rail bed, like every day, knowing that you're about 4 hours into a ride. It's like, yeah, as long as he keeps doing it, I'll keep doing it. So the minute you don't, I'll be like, where's Bart at today? Speaking of the rail trail, we were talking about a pretty interesting story. I find it humorous and ironic. It's talking about organizations when they get a hold of something and says, we're going to make it better. We're going to control it. We're going to make laws and shit. That never works out for the best. Well, I mean, I can understand the purpose, but it's another one of those yin yang things because, with that's going to come corruption, bullshit laws, bullshit ordinances, and you got to take good with bad, I guess. So in particular, there's this one spot like where the Lebanon County rail trail meets the Lancaster County rail trail. And of course, you're not supposed to ride at night on the rail trail, but supposedly just Lancaster is the only one that enforces it. So how did that go again, really quickly, if you could summarize?
Well, I've been doing it for 3 years. I ride out to Lebanon and I turn around and I come back. So around November, when it gets dark at like 5:30, I normally am riding half an hour on the trail in the dark.
Yeah.
I did it for 3 years, but then somebody must have got mad or something because they had nothing better to do. And I was coming back, and I go on the Lancaster section literally for half a mile. There was a state park ranger waiting for me, and he actually gave me a ticket of $180 fine for riding on the Lancaster section because he said you can't ride it at night. And I was like, that's insane.
So, we have to work a Lupine story into almost every podcast. So, he had a beautiful light on his bike called a Betty, right?
Betty and the rear tail light as well. The Rotlick.
The Rotlick, which makes being unsafe totally absurd.
2,500 lumen.
Yeah. Now it's 54, but yeah. That's how long he's had that Betty. That's a testimony to the durability of Lupine products. Okay, cool. So, one of those days when we were hooking up on the railroad bed, talking about stuff, that's also to a point that you made earlier about, cycling is the new golfing. It's where people talk about stuff and where they get together and where they talk about business. I know I always talk about a lot of business ideas and stuff, and not just monkey business, but regular business. And I learned so much about different people while I'm riding, right? And that's the fun of it. And so you made a great point because in the old days, 2 or 3 guys would get together, in the neighborhood and they'd go play a round of golf. And that was the way they bonded. Now, and guys and girls, and now they would get together on their $10,000 bicycles and go out for a century. I find that way more productive. But again, there's just so much that you discuss and meet with people that you normally wouldn't get that chance, that interaction. But a long bike ride, you get that chance, and that's pretty cool. And that's probably what I like more about it than anything, actually. Seeing people I haven't seen in a while and then just riding with them and talking about stuff, what's going on in life. Get that vibe too?
Yeah, I mean, when I meet up with either you or Bill or Spittle on the trail, and because I've been riding with since I was 16, so like half of my life, you get to ride with them for a little while, and you just get to see what everybody's up to. Sometimes we see Carl Whitus, who I haven't seen for many years.
So that's true with everybody. So just think, if we weren't all out there cycling, we wouldn't see these guys, and then therefore, if out of sight, out of mind, then they don't exist. And then all of a sudden somebody says, oh yeah, they passed on to the next universe. And you're like, shit, if not for cycling. So that's why, and that's kind of an extension of my thoughts about this podcast. It's like, why do you do it, man? You're not making any money or anything. It's like, I do it because I can and because I like it, but also because I get a chance to talk to people throughout my life, and especially related to cycling, because that's been such an important part of my life. And it's like after every long, hard bike ride, or any bike ride, but my life has somewhat changed a little bit. My mind is different. I'm in a better place. And then the same with these podcasts. I get to talk to people about cycling or something related to cycling. And then after that podcast, I've learned a little bit. My perspective's tweaked just a bit. And I'm like, I think I'm a better person. And I'm definitely in a better place to enjoy life. And so it's for selfish reasons that I want to make sure that I see you on the trail. Because if I don't, I'll keep looking and looking and looking, and that won't be good.
I don't think I'm ever going to stop riding 100%. I mean, it's something that I've done for so long. And
Yeah,
I mean, if I didn't truly love it, I wouldn't have lasted 22 years.
for sure. For sure. So, yeah, I guess what we want to talk about now is that what we were talking about on one of our rides, which is what's on everybody's mind is COVID and vaccines. So then you're like, oh, yeah, I work in immunology and I work with COVID. And I was like, whoa, dude. So what is your position exactly?
Well, I work in clinical research for orthopedics, but I mean, I've been working in clinical research for 6 years. I got a science background, and we were heavily into research for our graduate work that we did as well. So, I mean, I know how to read studies. I know how to interpret data. I have a good medical background, so I know the pathophysiology of things. I'm not, by any means, I'm not an immunologist or a doctor or anything like that, and I don't claim to be, but I do know how to read and interpret data. So, in order to trick me like they tried to on TV, you got to try pretty hard.
Right. So that's where our discussion led on one of our long bike rides. So, and I've been thinking about that ever since. And a couple of questions always come to mind that I don't see on TV or the media or anybody actually talk about. Maybe you guys have to a certain extent, but there are two questions, and I'll give them to you both. They're like part A, part B. Before I was interested in hearing your answer, but it goes like this: if I get COVID and I start to survive it and I develop the antibodies, and then I get a vaccine, do I have more or less antibodies? Part B of that question is the reverse of that. So if I have a vaccine and then I get COVID, do I have more or less antibodies? It might not be an additive question, but how would you answer that?
Oh, I mean, the data is pretty clear on that. I mean, that's the thing you don't hear on TV at all. So, I mean, if you look at data, and there's plenty of it, people that have natural infection and then they recover, they actually compared that to people that had no prior infection and then just got the vaccination. And they looked at the trend of the antibody response over time. And it's very clear that there is a distinct high point, and that's at 6 months. And then after that, it just plummets. But that's for neutralizing antibodies. So that's for IgG and IgM antibodies, whether vaccinated or natural immunity. It's at 93.4%, I think, at about 6 months. But then what they weren't telling you on TV a long time ago is that at the 9-month mark, it drops to around 43%. And I'm not sure why they leave that out, probably political reasons. But I was calling everything way before it even was on TV, because for some reason they forgot the first 2 months of the clinical trial that Pfizer was doing. They just totally cut that out of anything that everybody ever talked about. So, and then there's also other studies that look at people that had prior infection and then got the 2-dose of Pfizer. So, I mean, that's pretty clear that people that had infection and then got 1 dose of Pfizer, it gave them way more of an antibody response. You can call it a supra antibody response, way above the baseline that a person would get with 2 vaccine doses. But then they also did the second dose, and it actually didn't increase their antibody level above baseline.
For those that had the disease already.
Yeah, so meaning that somebody that had prior exposure to COVID-19 pretty much only needs 1 dose. But that gives you what they now are considering a booster dose for everybody else. So if you had natural infection and you get 1 dose, it's like a booster dose pretty much. And the second dose is worthless, essentially. But the main thing that they don't look at or even talk about, and there's been people on the medical side that's actually talk about this. Dr. Marty McCary from Hopkins, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, he was the former head of the FDA and he works for Pfizer. They talk about this. Dr. Bhattacharya talks about this from Stanford, that B and T cell immunity is something that the NIH should be looking into and using their money that they have to research, because that's going to be longer standing than the neutralizing antibodies. So if you look at normal SARS, they're finding that people that had infection from normal SARS and survived actually still have B and T cell immunity. And that's about 15 years. So they're not sure how effective that is against reinfection, but they do know that it is a little delayed, your B and T cell response when you're infected. It's delayed. It's not as instantaneous as the neutralizing antibody response. So like IgA spikes really quick, but that normally tails off about 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in. Then it's IgG and IgM that carry on because they code with the spike protein. So they're a lot more specific. But the B and T cell immunity is the thing that nobody ever looks into. And so now it's gotten to the point where they're trying to mandate that everybody across the board get a vaccine, regardless, because they don't want to acknowledge natural
regardless
immunity.
If they've been in contact or not. So they don't want to acknowledge natural immunity.
And the thing with that is that I would bet that if they look retrospectively, when they're able to be honest and open and actually look at data with an open mind, that people that are having a higher reaction to the vaccine probably had normal exposure to COVID-19
already.
I would be willing to bet that, yeah.
So for the most part, in about 6 to 9 months after you're vaccinated, you're going to need revaccinated.
Well, but that's only if you're looking at the neutralizing antibodies. I mean, that's not taking into account B and T cell immunity. That's going to be long standing. So, I mean, we know that
might be a second part of the body's immune system then.
Yeah, that's the longer standing type of the immune system, because I actually, when I tested positive, I did antibody testing, and then I just did antibody testing recently because I was doing my own study on myself.
Yeah.
And so about 11 and a half months, I got tested a few weeks ago, and I had no antibodies in my system.
Left over, nothing.
But that's what you would expect if you know how the slope of the bell curve goes. So at 6 months, it peaks, and then it really, really drops off. And then if you extrapolate out, you would expect that 11, 12 months, based on the data and extrapolation, that you would have no antibodies at that point. But then that's when B and T cell immunity is most likely going to be kicking in.
It takes over, right?
That's what you would expect.
So then what about, every year they want you to get a flu shot. And that's not also considering T and B cell immunity.
But that's a totally different type of virus.
It's not coronavirus.
The thing that they try to do is they try to compare everything like everything's all the same. Just like everybody, they say everybody has the same immune response, which is 100% not true if you look at the data. So people that have poor outcomes with COVID-19, they make it seem like everybody that gets infected is going to end up in the hospital and die. That's 100% not the case. So the majority of the people are over 65, and they have 2 pre-existing conditions. So they have hypertension, they have cancer, they have autoimmune disease, they have type 2 diabetes, they have renal disease, or they have pulmonary disease like COPD, or they have...
Which is like a big part of the population over 65.
So that's the point, though. Even people that are under 65 that have bad outcomes, that's why they'd say, well, it's not always age. Sometimes they're saying that even if you're younger, you can still die. But those people have pre-existing conditions, regardless of what their age is. They still have those pre-existing conditions. I mean, there's data on this. There's plenty of data on that to show that even people that get reinfected, those people are 65 and older and have 2 pre-existing conditions, even for the reinfection. And the reinfection rate is well below, like, I think it's below 0.5%. So it's a very small population. Because none of these studies are coming from the US. All the studies that we're using here, they're all coming from either the UK, well, actually, most of them are coming from the UK or China, but I'm not sure how much I would trust the studies from China. Because
anyway, public perception wouldn't trust the studies from China, even though you may trust them.
But
so that's a perception problem
studies,
with us
though,
in China.
You have to look at the methodology of a study. Not every study is a good study. That's the main thing. So the thing I do when I look at a study, the first thing I do is look at the methodology. If the methodology isn't like up to par, I don't even look at the study. I don't even consider it valid.
So let's summarize it just before we got to this point. So basically, there's more to continued immunological response, either naturally occurring or with a virus, than there is just to antibody. So if you go in and go, oh, your antibodies are down low after 9 months, you're more susceptible. Or conversely, if you have more antibodies, then they will do better, is not considering T and B cell immunity.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that they don't take into account. I mean,
so it's not just about antibody production.
No, I mean, it's an all-encompassing aspect of the immune system and the immune response. Whether it's the neutralizing antibodies, CD4, CD8, T cells, and then the B cell immunity.
So would we be better off as a nation without vaccines?
I am by no means an anti-vaxxer. At this point, the data is clear. If you were infected previously and you want to get a booster vaccine, go for it. If you didn't get infected and you are 65 and older and you have conditions like I mentioned earlier, I mean, it's in your best interest to get the vaccine because the likelihood of having a poor outcome outweigh any side effects you'd get from the vaccine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, but if you're not in those groups, and you don't want to get a vaccine just because you don't think you need it, at this point, that's on you. So you have free will in this country. You have the freedom of choice. And if you weren't previously infected and you don't get the vaccine, and you have to accept what could potentially happen to you.
Okay, so let me pose this situation to you. So a lot of us surviving this pandemic has to do with our economic stability. Because if our economy takes a shit and the rest of the world doesn't, then we're in deep shit. So you got to keep the economy cranking. And in particular, that's why we created a whole bunch of money, pumped it out to the people and say, okay, just get through this. This money will hold you over because we can't afford to have the economy shut down. Because then talk about, losing our worldwide, not the biggest army in the world is going to help you if your economy takes a shit. So that being said, if we didn't get vaccinated and we were allowing the vaccine to take its course, which is what a lot of freedom people say, no, it's just the way it's going to be. You can't force me to do that. There's chances are that more people will not be able to go to work and more people would die, correct? In the short run. In the long run, we might get through it, like we will, because you can't kill humans in the long run. I mean, we made it to the dark ages. Come on.
I mean,
is that a sound theory?
I agree with that, except for the fact that some people can get 2 doses of the vaccine and have no antibody response.
So I guess where I'm going with this is from my economic point of view, is if, like you said, no, we're not forcing anybody to do this. You don't have to get a vaccine. Most of the people say, well, I'm not getting one. So then more people wouldn't be able to go to work and more businesses would be disrupted. And then the overall economy would be languished and our overall security and quality of life would take a big dive and would take a hell of a long time to get back. So I look at the vaccine just like I look at money creation to try to shorten that interval of disharmony. So got to keep the economy running, and you got to keep people running. And so does that outweigh personal freedoms? I don't know. So if everybody said, screw it, I'm just not going to go to work, I'm not doing anything, and I'm not getting a vaccine, then the economy takes a shit, and then we're in deep shit. So, I mean, does that make sense?
I mean, I'm not, by no means am I saying not to get a vaccine. I'm
No,
just
I know
saying,
that. I'm just debating it out loud with you.
You have to keep everything in perspective. So the thing that I was always afraid of, and it's starting to come true, is that, once they start to mandate stuff, where does it stop? If you look at the vaccine card, there's not just 2 lines on that vaccine card. And I noticed it a long time ago. And I've said before, they're saying it now. I told my parents that back in June. I said, you just watch, because that's when all the data was coming out about booster shots. And I was like, well, they're going to start to mandate that. But if you're going to mandate that, then when are they going to mandate a flu vaccine? Because flu, statistically speaking, kills more younger children than COVID-19 does. So why, and how many people get the flu vaccine?
So, so the contention is solid. Like, the government wants to survive like you want to survive. It has its own entity. It has its own mindset. And so for the government to survive, it needs to say, well, we got to mandate the people, because otherwise the whole economy will disrupt, and then the government won't have anything to do about anything. I have a whole bunch of different theories, those who know me, and I don't think that's the case, because I'm a money creation guy. But anyway, that's so you got to kind of expect that from governments. But I will say that I don't think extrapolation theory necessarily works, and I don't see many examples of it in our world, and now and historically. So when people say, they do this, it's one more step down that slippery slope, and that government can start mandating all kind of shit on your ass. Again, my pushback, I understand that. Believe me, I was a conspiracy theorist way back before there was Facebook. This is what cracks me up. It's like now everybody's like, oh, there's a conspiracy. The government is trying to do this. It's like, dude, I was talking about that in 1971. But now all of a sudden Facebook, so it's fashionable. Like, everybody's talking about a conspiracy. It's like, yeah. So tell me something I didn't know. I've been talking about government conspiracies since Kennedy, since Vietnam. So the only thing I could say is I have a conspiracy theory, my own, and it's that extrapolations rarely hold out. No matter what it is, you say, if this keeps up, then we're not going to have any rights. If this keeps up, we won't have any oil. Remember that one in the 70s and 80s? We'll be out of oil by the turn of the century. I hope you're going to be happy. And every time people say that, I also notice that the society, the free markets adapt, and the extrapolation never carries out to its nth degree. And that's my only pushback on whether the government will continue to put controls on you till it's something like 1984 bull crap, I
think with all this, I mean, I come from a scientific viewpoint where, I mean, politics, I don't even think should be involved in science, to be honest with you. So, I mean, the whole thing with me is that, well, you can look at the UK, or not UK, Israel, where a lot of the studies also come from, in Israel, where they also had the vaccine passports, where they're still having a high rate of infection, and a lot of that population has been vaccinated. That's what the people don't understand. And that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that, you can enforce it, you can get everybody vaccinated, but not everybody has the same response. So unless you're willing to stop international travel, because you have to vaccinate a specific portion of the world to actually end a pandemic. And unless you're willing to go to the third world countries and stop it at the roots over there and stop international travel, there's always going to be new variants going. So if you're going to keep mandating stuff, I come from a scientific perspective like that. I mean, politically, I'd rather not have that into the conversation, but it's like, if it doesn't make scientific sense to me, it's just not really worthwhile.
How about if it makes socio-political sense? Like, governments maybe know the same thing that what you've just talked about, what and they go, I realize they don't always work. However, we want to resume tourism to Israel. So, like, the airlines want to have this because the Pilots Association and the Steward Association said, Flight Attendant Association says, I'm not going on that plane unless you make sure those people are vaccinated. And they said, okay, we'll do it. So I think they do it for political, socio reasons, not for scientific reasons. And the rest of us just have to bear with that at the expense of not traveling and having the economy collapse.
But I mean,
would be the opposite.
But if people are vaccinated, that's the thing that I really don't understand. It's frustrating to me. If you're vaccinated, the likelihood of being reinfected, unless, like I said before, but you have those pre-existing conditions and the age, you're fine. Even with the new variants, if you do get reinfected, it's most likely going to be a minor cold-like symptom. So are you? It's kind of like we're doing everything in reverse. You're trying to protect vaccinated people from unvaccinated people. It just doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, whoever's vaccinated doesn't have to worry.
That's a brilliant point. That's
stuff.
Really important, right? So you don't care, and that's kind of the way I am with it. I don't really care.
The unvaccinated people obviously don't care because they didn't get vaccinated and they didn't have natural infection. So, but unless you're willing to also take into account natural infection as well and not mandate stuff on them, I have a big problem with that. I mean, because I was willing to lose my job over that.
So that gets back to you were ready to say, I choose not to work here if you choose to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I had to sign a waiver because I know what the data says, and I'm not going to just do something just because the politics say that's what I have to do.
Yeah.
I refuse to do that. Now, if I didn't work in this field and I didn't have access to all this data that I have, then I wouldn't know any better and I would just do it. But I make sure that I tell everybody I know how it really works and all the actual data so that they can make the best decision for themselves.
Yeah.
Because in the end, you have to do what you feel best is in your best interest.
And so I would say that it's still not a problem in a free America. So an employer can say, you know what, I've used all the data, I've done some scientific research, but here's the thing, I want all my employees to be vaccinated. Then you can tell the free society still works because the employee can say, I choose not to do that and I choose to leave.
Yeah.
And so as long as that's still in place, I'm not worried about government mandating anything, because if everybody feels that way, then they can just go and work for somebody else, or that business can go out of business or whatever. That's the point of a free market. So when people tell me, and there are a lot of people out there that have a problem with the Democratic administration currently, and they talk stuff like socialism and communism. So, and those also happen to be the same people that also say, I'll be, I'm not going to, I don't think my employer should fire me just because I don't want to take a vaccine. And I'm like, well, wait. If the employer exercises his economic freedom in a free market society, he doesn't have to hire anybody if he doesn't want to. So what you're suggesting is that we want to return to some form of communism or socialism where that guy he can't take my job away. He's got to let me work there, even though I don't want to take the vaccine. It's like, no, he doesn't. He doesn't have to do shit, or she. So I just find that maybe it's just me. You guys tell me, is that a solid point or what? If you want free markets, then this is a consequence of, and like you said, I'm prepared to go elsewhere. So, but the same person that says, you can't fire me because I don't want to take a vaccine that's mandated, then I say that's socialism.
Well, that's where I'm very consistent. Unlike a lot of people, I think I should have the free will, and the employer should have the free will to do as they please.
Correct.
So if I wanted to have the free will, but I said no, the employer can't, that's contradictory.
Correct.
That's not how I work. I'm very even on both sides.
Thank you. So that's a great point. And you are, that's why you're Bart. But again, when I make that point to most people, they go, no, the Democrats are socialists. I'm like, well, you just want them to keep your job because you don't want to take a vaccine. You're right. You're making that's socialism. So you're not standing behind the free market and the employer's freedom to do as he pleases, just like you can do as you please. That's a brilliant point. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's some people that have really crazy ideas about why they don't want to get a vaccine, which is, I don't have time for that. I mean, that's like, those people are out there.
Yeah.
Some of the things that I hear, that's the other problem. 16 months into this, some of the things that I hear people say, I'm like, I don't know where you get that from. That's like not even close to like how the data actually lines up.
Good stuff. And what do you get, blank stares?
Well, I make sure I educate them because I want everybody to have the data so they can make the best decision. But they're like, well, how do you know that? I'm like, because I actually stay up to date with the data.
So Israel's always a strange bird, you know, from a lot of reasons. But that in particular is like the highest rate of vaccination, and yet also a higher rate of disease contraction, right?
I think it has a lot to do with just the society over there, the Jewish community, where a lot of them. I was actually surprised to see that they had a high rate of vaccination over there, because here in the U.S., definitely up in New York, they don't usually do a lot of vaccinations in those communities. So I was kind of surprised to see that happen over there. But a lot of it stems from international travel. That's why all the variants keep going. They keep changing.
Yeah.
And unless you can really get to the root of the problem, the variants are not going to stop. You're never going to end the SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. It's just going to always continue to mutate. You're going to have different variants. And as you see, as we get new variants, they get stronger. And that's why they're able to break through the vaccines to cause reinfection. But now it's like a cold or flu-like symptom.
So what do you think of DARPA?
DARPA? I'm actually not too familiar with DARPA.
So that was like the government agency that works in conjunction with the Pentagon. And they said, look, they were formed like after 9/11. They said, you guys got to start figuring out how to deal with terrorism, all different types, like radiation poisoning, like pandemics, like all the different things, contamination of the water supply. And a bunch of PhDs put them together, said, start working on this. And this was trans administration. So they were there at Bush and they were there at Obama. Everybody kept DARPA going. So when, you know, they would also present the PhDs with mock drills, because that's the way it goes, right? It's not like, hey, you can prepare for something. So they would say, okay, here's a situation, blank, the water supply has been contaminated. How are you going to deal with it? And they'd have to, you know, you got 30 days to deal with it. And so the other thing they do is they would give them mock diseases. And they'd say, okay, you got 30 days to come up or 90 days to come up with a vaccine. They said that's impossible, but they figured how to do it, you know, and they would compete against each other, teams of PhD types. And so then one day they came in and they said, here's your next, you know, competition. It's real. It's called COVID. And they said, okay, so you got 90 days to come up with a vaccine. And so they worked with Merck and Pfizer and Moderna, and they were able to do it. And and they did it because of this training protocol that they had been through. And they said, we know how to attack this. So one of the things they did was they went and they found survivors of the Spanish flu, which apparently was a coronavirus. And they found these guys. And then, as you know, your human body is a library of immunological responses. As long as you live, there's trace of that. So they went and found these 100-year-old survivors from the Spanish flu. And they said, you know, what do the antibodies look like and how do they work against the coronavirus? And that's how they discovered the vaccine for the coronavirus. So the story goes, how much you can believe it, that was like a 60-minute deal.
Well, actually, that's why it didn't take them very long, because they started looking at the beta coronavirus, which is what this is. That's the type of coronavirus. It's the beta variant. They started looking at that back in 2008. So they knew a lot of stuff. And this is all done over in China, in the lab that everybody doesn't want to talk about. And if you know anything about that lab, because again, if you look at actual articles, journal articles, they looked at all the labs in China, and I think there's about 43 labs in China. Only 4 of them met the safety standards.
Of what, the WHO or something?
No, just normal like research standards for safety protocols and stuff like that. The lab that they did over in Wuhan, where this came out of, that is about
Didn't meet him.
Everybody says it's a level 4 biosafety lab. It's about a level 2. It had very basic violations for safety and contamination.
Mm.
It's all documented, but it's older stuff that a lot of people probably don't even know about. Because Rand Paul has been in the news a lot. He's been bringing up a lot of stuff. And I'm surprised that he's the only one that mentions this stuff because it's all documented. It's all very well documented stuff. The lady that he keeps talking about that everybody calls the bat doctor from China.
Yeah.
If you look at the, so that's when it goes back to EcoHealth that he also talks about, Rand Paul. EcoHealth that got the grant from the NIH and then works over into the lab.
Right.
All that stuff is on the internet. You can see all that. So if you look at EcoHealth website, it has affiliates. It says NIH. And then if you look at the Wuhan actual website, because they have a website, probably shouldn't have went on it because it was it wasn't a protected website. But it actually lists out all their affiliates, and it lists EcoHealth. And then you can look at the scientists that work there, and it says what universities they're affiliated with, what types of research they do. And the lady that Rand Paul always talks about is listed there. Then if you cross-reference that with old journal articles that date back to 2008 to 2010, where they were doing modeling off of SARS and changing the genome a little bit, she's actually listed on studies, along with the NIH as an acknowledgement on some of the gain-of-function research is what they're talking about a lot now. So this whole virus is built off of the SARS, but the backbone of it was changed a little bit so that it was more, it could adhere to the ACE receptor easier, because everybody keeps talking about this is from the wet lab or the wet market.
Yeah.
But this is 100% made in the lab. I mean, if you know historical data and historical studies, there's no way around that.
So, in general, I want to do a Gretna Billism, and I say that, and my first example is that mankind always goes through these things, and it always comes out better at the end. We're all, as a population, more informed. The medical profession is more informed. Everybody knows how to deal with it better. And I don't want to say that it's a series of harsh fire drills, but I think that mankind is always is going to be slightly more informed and slightly better with dealing with pandemics going forward. Just as if in 9/11, we thought, oh, this is horrible. All these planes are getting hijacked. Terrorism is such a threat. Well, we dealt with it. And now, when was the last time you heard of a plane getting hijacked? So my point is that although as painful as this is, and so many uncovered truths tend to be harsh to us, and we go, this is it. They're all trying to get us. I just look at it more as this is just another one of those things in human nature that you got to deal with, just like you do in your own life, just like you're dealing with your shoulder. And so I don't want to be all gloom and doom, but I'm so glad we got to talk about those things because, again, this is why I love cycling and the podcast, because I learned so much. That ride along that day with you at the rail trail that we were talking about this same sort of thing, I changed a whole bunch of things, my thought processes in my mind started to go down a different track. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So at the end of the day, I always think it's not so bad. It's not the end of the world. It's just we got to deal with it better, and we will because of people like yourself and discussions that we're having. And the only thing that's kind of disheartening is now we have probably an opportunity where we can research so much more than we ever could in the history of mankind. And yet, day after day, you're coming across people that are like totally, you can tell they haven't done an ounce of real research, just regurgitated some stuff that's been fed to them. And that's kind of disheartening to me.
Yeah, I think that, Dr. Gottlieb, he said the same thing in an interview the other day that I've been thinking for a while, is that the CDC is not actually the best agency to handle anything like this. They're not really geared towards like pandemic response. They're more of like a historic, retrospective aspect look on data.
And these are trends that are going on in our society, and we may want to re-examine them.
Because
but
pretty much we let everything up to the CDC as far as guidance and stuff like that, and they're not geared towards anything like that.
So, solid point. So this gets back to government. They're not necessarily conspiring against us. It's just that they're learning all the time, and they have to work with their inefficient bureaucracy.
Well, you have to let the free market work.
Yeah.
Because look at how fast it came once you pumped the money into that and said, look,
Right.
we're giving you the money, whether the drug fails or not in the clinical trials, we're going to cover you.
So that's it. It's always the free market at the end of the day. And so that goes back to, if I don't want to take a vaccine and I'm going to be unvaccinated and my employer says, then you're fired, that's the free market at work.
Yeah.
He can do what he wants. You can do what you want. And that's an important point. But then the government mandate thing kind of blows that all apart. That's what you're saying, is that screws up the free market. And I got a problem with that. Anytime you're screwing with the free market, I got a problem.
I think at this point, we're so far gone as a society that nothing's going to really bring anything back together. The cohesion is gone.
Yeah.
So you just, there's no fixing it at this point.
Yeah, there's no fixing it. Except maybe, there's no fixing it. But I'm not so sure there's ever been a fix for it. I think it's always been kind of chaos, controlled chaos moving forward. And yeah.
Well, it's gone so mainstream now to just hate on everybody. It's like, that's not the way this should be.
Yeah. Yeah, it isn't. And whenever I listen to Cordy Byron playing music, he always says, Cordy, anyway, yeah, you don't have time for that stuff. You're right. But Cordy always says, be the most excellent person you can be and be excellent to everybody in your life. And as I get older, I try to do that, Maybe when I was younger and somebody did a bad deed to you or said something that wasn't right, then your mind kind of wants to retaliate. It's just natural human nature. But now as I get older, I say, stop with that thought. You don't want to retaliate because it doesn't accomplish anything. It's like, how can I be better myself and maybe not say that thing that offended somebody? Or how can I help this person rather than, which is kind of counterintuitive to a free market economy. But I think both can exist, yin and yang, simultaneously. And that's the art of going forward in life, is to try to blend those concerns. Keep your free market, keep your own identity, but at the same time, assimilate into a society more so. But then we can always not assimilate when we ride bike. And that's why I like it, because it's like, okay, I can't take it anymore. I'm just going for a bike ride. And then finally, when I come back from my bike ride, I'm like, okay, I'm normal again for a while till the next encounter.
I mean, there's a podcast I listen to. I don't know if you listen to Jocko podcast, Jocko Willink.
No, I've heard about it.
He's a former Navy SEAL, and so I've read all of his books because I have him on audiobook, and then I listen to his podcast religiously. And the most important thing I've learned from him is that whenever you're faced with a difficult situation, you take a step back, you look around, and it allows you to think before you act.
Yes. That's kind of what I was saying before. So now before I'll quick retaliate or say something, it's just like, just take a step back and you're better off not doing anything for this moment.
And to be a good leader, this is another thing that he talks about a lot that I learned from him, is that in order to be a good leader, you have to also know how to be a good follower. So that's where like the whole mandate thing that they went totally wrong, where in order to make people want to follow you, you have to allow them a little bit of leadway to, that you trust them, and you have to let them run a little bit, but then you have to keep them in check. But you can't lead from the front. So you have to let the people at some point go and do their own thing. So
like your children, even though like my old man would look at me with a lot of things I do or say, and he wouldn't say anything. I'm like, what? And he's like, no, go ahead and do it. And he knew that I was going. So other parents might say, here's why you can't do that. That's stupid. But he would just say, go ahead. And then afterwards, when it was a disaster, I would go, man, I know he didn't say anything because he didn't want it. He wanted me to experience it, make my own mistakes. Somebody said the other day, it's like, you got to recognize that when you were 20, you were kind of an idiot. Not so much you. From your life.
No, I definitely was.
So you got to recognize that when you were 20, you're an idiot. And that if you don't recognize that, then you're an idiot still. Well, you have to make sure that you give everybody all the information that they need. Yeah. And then you let them go. Because if they fail, that means it's because you as the leader didn't provide them with adequate information to do their job correctly. Right. And if they fail, then that's on them, but they have to regroup, and then you take over a little bit until
they get back on track.
Kind of like, it's up to you as a leader. One of the most important things you can do is supply and enable all the resources and tools to that person. But they ultimately have to figure shit out.
But you have to explain to them why it's important
You got
to
to
do
give them
something.
the purpose, right?
Yeah.
So when you were talking about leading from behind, that's my favorite. That's one of my favorite things to talk about is Taoism and Lao Tzu. You know that guy? You ever read? Okay. Yep. And of course, what you were talking about was his famous narrative is you got to be a good leader. You lead from behind. And that's kind of what you were saying. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, because Jocko, he was in Fallujah, and so he has a lot of really good experience, firsthand experience with being shot at. So, and he was the task unit commander. So he said, you can't lead from the front because then you can't see what's happening behind you, and you can't lead from all the way in the back because then you can't see what's happening in the front. So you had to be towards the front, but you had to be back far enough that you're able to see still in front of your guys. But you have to make sure all your guys are trained well, so that way they know what to do on their own. Because if they don't,
because you always won't be there for them.
Yeah,
it's the same with your kids. You can only give them the tools and the education, but you can't make the decision for them. And then you kind of hope that they make the right decision, and that's kind of the free market.
Yeah,
and usually they do with that understanding. So that's good stuff. So thanks for coming out today.
Sure, thanks for having me,
dude. This is awesome.
Now that I know this section is back here, I never knew. 25 years, I never even knew this neighborhood was back here.
Another 3-mile loop onto your 400-mile loop next week. So, any parting thoughts for everybody? You've been so super informative. I just jazzed talking to you, and I knew it would be this way.
No, I want everybody to make the best decision for them just in life, not regardless of what's been going on the past 16 years. You have to be your best advocate because nobody's going to stand up for your best interest as much as you are.
Yeah.
So you have to keep that in mind. You got to do whatever is in your best interest.
And, that's also an interesting point about our particular culture is that a lot of times when you're trying to do the best thing for you, it's interpreted by those around you as being selfish, but it's not necessarily selfish. So you trying to be the best for you is just what you got to do. And then you can be a better person to others.
Yeah, and just because you're doing what's best for you doesn't mean that you have to inflict that on others.
Right.
I mean, you still have to be.
It's not selfish. It's just what I'm doing at this moment. Like, and that's the way I justify bicycle riding. It's like, why do you do that? Why are you spending like 6 hours on the bike every day or every other day? I wish it was 6 these days. It's just because that's what I need to do.
Because I'm crazy.
It doesn't have anything to do with you. Okay, so that doesn't mean that I'm selfish or anything. I'm just doing my thing. I mean, why do you watch TV 6 hours?
Yeah.
Good stuff. I think I want to get audiobooks too, but I always listen to music usually when I'm on the road. And the other thing is, I swear to you that when I'm riding miles and miles, especially by myself, aside from all the benefits we talked about, how it's a great chance to catch up with people and get their perspective on life, and then that somehow alters your life because you think, that's a good point. But then I spend a lot of time alone on the bike, obviously, we all do. And I think that I work out a lot of shit in my head. Some people may need to go to therapy, or some people may need to do whatever, talk with their wives or whatever. But like, I can work out a lot of shit in my head on the bicycle. And so that's why it's refreshing too, from that standpoint. You feel the same way, sort of?
Yeah, I used to write a lot of my papers for school as I was riding. I would get ideas and I would jot them down on my phone so that I had like a template by the time I got done with my ride.
That's kind of what I do with podcasts, because they said, why do you do it, Bill? It's like, I like doing it. I like meeting people. It changes my life, just like cycling has. And I want to share that experience with all of us in hopes that it'll make the light better, because we just got done talking about what is your purpose. Since we're here and we're not alone, then why don't you try to make the situation better in your own mind and then those around you?
But when I was racing, I never used to listen to music because I'm not sure if you know David Goggins, if you've heard of him at all. He's another former Navy SEAL. He does a lot more motivational speaking type stuff.
No.
He puts crazy stuff up on YouTube. Like he runs like marathons almost every day. But he says he's along the same lines too, is that, you know, the music, once you get 6-7 hours in, actually helps to motivate you. But when you're racing, you don't have that extra motivation. So you have to be willing to train in the same environment that you're going to be racing in. So without external motivators.
Good point. Well, yeah, I always say that. And I think it was told to me by a football coach early on, which was, you know, practice like you play and then you play like you practice. And so that was the whole deal. So just don't go about, you know, practice like it's a half-assed kind of a thing. It's, no, dude, this is like the real deal. So that's a great point. But I still listen to music.
I do now.
Yeah.
Because I'm not racing anymore.
Yeah. Well, and what I do is not necessarily racing. I mean, I go to races and I'm a participant, but I wouldn't necessarily call it racing. Bill Carewood, he still races.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Dude, the guy's amazing, eh? And Spittle, too. Jeez. But Spittle worries me once in a while, too, because he said, dude, if I ever stop racing, he goes, I won't ride anymore. And I'm like, oh, man, John, I don't want to hear that. Come on.
He's a really competitive guy. Really competitive, Spittle.
Yeah. All right. We're going to wrap this up, Josh. Is that okay? Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Thanks for being on the show.
Man.
It was great chat. We got to do this again. And you know what we always say? Bart would agree with this. Long live long rides. Peace out.
Absolutely.
Peace out, everybody.